Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down having real conversations with real parents about what's going on in our Texas schools. And today we are honored to be joined by Dr. Deborah Cohen. Dr. Cohen is a professor at the University of Texas at Austin's Dell Medical School in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, where she specializes in ensuring that children get the mental health care that they need. And while there are few jobs more important than addressing the mental health crisis that we can see going on in Texas and across the country, Deborah's here as a mom. She's here to talk about her two young boys, both of whom have special needs, and how special needs parents and all parents can address the system to make sure their kids get the care that they need. Debbie, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, I want to talk about your experience with your sons, starting with your older son, who you had to go to the school system to start with the IEP process. Can you talk to us a little bit about IDEA and your process of seeking and obtaining the IEP to make sure he got the services he needs?
Yeah, so with our oldest child, so we have two boys. We have one who currently is 9, one who's 6. So they're going into 4th grade and 1st grade. And so with our oldest, he unfortunately was in pre-K his last year of preschool during the COVID shutdown. So his kindergarten experience was a little different than most kids. We had decided that when we came back, just based on that he's a very enthusiastic little guy, we knew that taking the option for being doing virtual school was not going to be a fit for him as a 5-6-year-old boy. So we sent him to the in-person option when he was in kindergarten. What we saw was originally when it was a really, really, really small ratio, which happened because in our district they would change every 9 weeks, more kids started coming back.
Okay.
The first year. He started having more difficulties with how chaotic the classroom was. It was a chaotic time for these kindergartners. They were adjusting to going to school full time. A lot of them had never, been in a structured environment, and it was just causing him more and more distress to be able to focus. So we had conversations with the school about, he's pretty enthusiastic. He struggles focusing. Maybe it might be that he has attention deficit hyperactive disorder. We ended up talking to our pediatrician. She did some standard diagnostics at that point and said, yeah, he likely qualifies. Filled out a form, send it back to the school. And at that point, we did what was called the 504 plan, which actually falls under the Rehab Act and not IDEA. Okay. The easiest way to explain the difference is the 504 plan has a little less protection. It's usually where schools start. Okay. You're not fully enrolling a kid in special education, but you're outlining some different things that they might want to try, resulting in accommodations. And so throughout the kindergarten year, it wasn't really getting better. He still was really struggling. More kids were getting added to the classroom. He was struggling more and more and more. So by 1st grade, when we went in, nothing really changed, new teacher, but it kept on getting worse and worse to the point that, we were getting calls constantly from the principal complaining about his behavior, and that we kept on saying, maybe we should try something different. Maybe we should try evaluation. Maybe what we're trying is not working. The school's response was to suspend him. So
that's hard.
So right about his 7th birthday, or right at the Thanksgiving, they suspended him, sent him to a program called DAP, which is usually for middle school and high school kids, for 29 days.
For violence or really aggressive?
They said as being a behavioral problem.
Okay.
Was their explanation. And they claimed, well, no, it's therapeutic. It's not intended to be
What was your mom
therapeutic.
gut telling you at this time?
Well, that
we
they're
all have
breaking
that, right?
rules.
Right, okay.
So what we found out in that time was that what the misstep we had was we hadn't put all those requests in writing. So what I learned during this process, I had reached out to other...
Can I stop you for
Yes.
1 second? Moms and dad, this is really, really important. If your mom or dad gut tells you that there's a problem, please listen to Debbie right now to explain the legal steps that you must take to ensure your child gets access to the individualized plan, or at least the 504 conditions that they have a right to. I just want to make sure everybody heard that.
This was the biggest thing, and now I always tell other parents when I encounter them about this, is that make sure you write a letter or you write an email. So we had just been endlessly asking, let's try to do something
because
different.
It has to be in writing, right?
Yeah, it has to be in writing.
Okay.
This is a federal rule. So how it looks like in the state of Texas. So the federal rule is it has to be in writing.
Okay.
So in Texas, we get a 45-day rule. So if you put it in writing, when they acknowledge, send you an email back and say, yes, I accept your request for an evaluation to possibly enroll them in an IEP, an individual education plan, which is like the paperwork that says they're enrolled in special ed. They have then 45 school days.
So 9 weeks.
Yes, 9 weeks.
All right.
Yes, to get it done. So it feels really, really long.
Sure.
So we figured out that had happened because I started complaining up the chain. The benefit of being at a university and having a lot of connections was, I at least had people I could call and say, something's wrong.
Right.
Tell me what I did wrong or how they're breaking rules.
Right.
Like, help me find this. And that was what was identified when I called people, is they said, oh, it wasn't in writing and they can ignore you.
Okay. So get it in writing, mom and dad. Send that email. Yes. Start that clock.
Yeah. So at that point then, we're going to Thanksgiving break. They sent him to DAP for all of December. And then we had Christmas break. So then, you're adding more days. So by the time this was fully processed, it was April. So just think about how long, because of how many days add on.
That had to be heartbreaking to watch.
It's just
this process for your child.
It's obnoxious, where it's more heartbreaking, yes, but also where you're like, we're adults, can't we figure this out?
Right. Yes. Yes.
This doesn't seem so hard. So the standard process is, they match you with the assigned school psychologist. We're in Round Rock School District, so they're well funded, well structured. That they have multiple school psychologists assigned to each school, so there's people available and ready to do this. So they assigned to someone. She identified the different things they wanted to test him for, and then also areas that they wanted to rule out. And also during this time, because we were so frustrated, we sought out a private psychologist to do private testing in case that we didn't like the school's outcome. And that had been one of the suggestions I had gotten from one of my friends.
At your own expense.
At your own expense. And it's not cheap to get a psych.
Would you share roughly what it costs?
It was about $4,000 or $5,000 out of pocket. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So your insurance does not cover these things.
Your insurance doesn't cover it. So we're talking, if you're a mom and dad and you can't strike a check for $4,000 to $5,000, you may not get an accurate assessment of your child. That's the reality.
Yeah, you're going to deal with what the school is. So we ended up having a conflict disagreement between the results. So the school felt that it was ADHD and that they did not feel that he met qualification for what we used to call Asperger's. Now they call it level 1 autism, because now they put it on a full spectrum.
Okay.
And our private psychologist said, no, it's probably both ADHD and Asperger's. And we didn't so much care about the diagnosis, but what the school is willing to do around accommodations is very different of how they treat ADHD versus what they feel on autism. Frankly, our experience was that there was a lot of bias and discrimination from the school, that they felt that diagnoses like ADHD, conduct disorder, oppositional defiance disorder, any of those sort of things, that they were just behavior problems. And that they were unwilling to give some of the accommodations that they would if we had a diagnosis of autism on paper.
So you're more likely to get disciplinary action. Is that correct?
Okay.
Yes. So let's be clear.
Yeah.
If you don't have the money to spend $4,000 to $5,000 sometimes to have an objective outside entity that's not beholden to the system make the diagnosis, it's very likely not only will the accommodations not be made, but likely the response could just be disciplinary action.
Yes. Yeah, okay. It could happen. The other thing, so what we ended up having to go to was a third level, which this has bothered me from perspective of like wasting resources. But so there is an option that if there's a disagreement, I believe you can still get access to this if you didn't pay for an outside party.
Okay.
You can tell the school, I disagree with your diagnosis and I want another evaluation. So we were in disagreement. It was about April. Then we told the school we didn't agree with it. Then they had to hire, the school had to pay an outside psychologist to do a third evaluation as the tiebreaker.
But you need it, you said, as a tiebreaker. You essentially
so
needed that
yes.
ability to say, we have an outside qualified doctor saying this is inaccurate, and then they went and got the third.
Yeah, so they review both documents. They review the school stuff, your outside, anything else you bring from a pediatrician, outside psychologist, psychiatrist. They review everything. They also meet with the parents and the child. And so she ended up siding with the private psychologist. And so just of timeline speaking, so this was not resolved until like October of his.
So we're a year in.
Second grade.
Yeah. Kids grow up so
yes,
fast.
They grow up so fast.
That's a lot of time.
Yes. And so we were just endlessly frustrated. And frankly, I have a full-time job. Derek has a full-time job. You get a lot of phone calls if you have a school that's not super happy with your child.
Sure.
So it's really, really frustrating because you have a kid who doesn't want to go to school and you have a school who's interrupting your workday all day long while this process is going on. So what ended up helping us in the end was that, we got the paperwork finally figured out, but the negative part was Round Rock and a lot of other schools were really struggling that year with teacher shortages. And so Round Rock had deployed some of their higher level special education management to provide some in-school support. And so one of the special ed leadership, someone in a leadership role was helping out and ended up being pulled in to help finalize our paperwork and discovered all the problems with this paperwork and how it was being implemented poorly and then fixed everything. So, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, once you get access to the right person who's very skilled. We also had a principal turnover. The person who was insistent that our child was just a problem left, and the new principal then never had any interaction with him in a negative way. And then so now he's going into fourth grade. So last year maybe got a phone call the entire year going from...
Because his needs are being met.
Yes.
And he's in the right environment.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
The other part with that is that, so he is what people consider as twice exceptional, which means is they qualify for gifted services, so their IQ is above a certain level, and then they have some sort of needs for special education services. And it's not just, the stereotypical one is a kid who has Asperger's and is gifted, but you could also have anxiety. You can also... have trouble with handwriting. You could be dyslexic and also gifted. There's a lot of different mismatches you can be. So the other thing that really helped us was that their gifted program is a lot more intensive once they hit second grade. So he wasn't so bored in the classroom. He was getting challenged. So that was going on. In addition that they were doing really, really simple accommodations that was helping. Like they were giving him breaks. They have this thing called a motor lab where they can it kind of looks like an occupational therapy gym where they have like big balls and trampolines and stuff like that. So they would let him have breaks. We are really fortunate that we actually have a lot of male paraprofessionals and the school social worker. So I think they do a really good job with harnessing some of the little boy energy.
Yes.
And so their programming of what they do with some of the kids who get breaks is a lot more active. And they were doing a running group at one point, all sorts of things to help them get their wiggles out.
Good.
So yeah, now we have no problems.
Well, that's great. I'm really glad to hear that eventually
It
you
worked
got
out.
there.
Yes.
But you had to have a lot of resources.
Yes.
You had to have the ability and the know-how to push back. And it sounds like you probably had to have some contacts to be able to push and lean until you got
Yes.
to the right person.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the reality is that it's really easy to tell how some parents get bullied and pushed around or just disengaged. The thing is, from my professional background, I've done a lot of work around multi-system work with kids and interacted with a lot of parents of children with disabilities or adult or children or parents of adult children to learn about their experiences.
Sure.
And, at some point, some of these individuals just start disengaging from these systems because it's such a negative experience.
Right.
I mean, the amount of conversations I've had with other parents to say that just seeing the school phone call is like not
Anxiety
to use
for them, probably.
not to use a kid term, but triggering, like you're in a meeting and then you're like, what am I going to get yelled at today about?
Sure. So, can you correct me if I'm wrong? Did SSES, was this a part of your journey with either of your children? Y'all used it, correct?
Yeah, we have with our youngest. So our youngest child's experience was wildly different. So our 6-year-old was born with Down syndrome, so trisomy 21. And when I I work around a lot of psychiatrists. I'm a social worker by training, a mental health services researcher. But when we had our youngest, I remember talking to some of the senior medical leadership about the experience of having a child with Down syndrome. And I remember one of them specifically saying is, you're going to realize it's a wildly different experience. Because my expertise is primarily like serious mental illness, like bipolar, schizophrenia, getting access to federal programs like Social Security insurance, SSI, some of those sort of things. People go through years and years of rejection of not accessing those services because a diagnosis like schizophrenia, you can't blood test for that. So you have to get all this paperwork together to prove you really need this resource.
Sure.
Versus something like Down syndrome. It's a genetic test. Like, people know if you have it or don't know, if you do or don't have it. And it's also written in different code that says, you get this if you have this diagnosis. Okay. So I remember him telling me that when I had it, you'll just see this is going to be some, sociological experiment of you seeing how different it is because you're used to psychosis and how people respond to that versus how people are going to respond to your child with Down syndrome. And it has been entirely true that the experience we've had since he's been little, people are like, here's the thing. They don't ask questions. Sometimes they overcompensate. They just assume that he can't do anything. So it has just been wildly different. So with him, we've accessed all the various programs, the standard programs. So we did early childhood intervention when he was 0 to 3. That's also, so I guess backtracking to what's covered in IDEA. So IDEA covers early childhood intervention. So that's 0 to 3. That is for individuals who primarily are born with a disability.
Where does a parent go to access the information to get that?
So there's a state website that will say within your specific county who is the ECI, early childhood intervention provider in town. For a lot of counties, it is your local mental health authority because they cover all the mental health, developmental disabilities, and also early childhood intervention for most counties. So that's usually where it's housed. In larger counties, like we're in Travis, there's also some private providers who also cover it because the numbers are so much larger.
Okay.
But you can go to Texas Health and Human Services website, look for early childhood intervention, and we'll tell you exactly where to call to enroll. So when we had our youngest, he was a preemie, so I knew some of those sort of things, but the hospital that we had him at had a wonderful team of occupational therapists, speech therapists, physical therapists, and social workers on the team. In addition to, they also had a family partner, which is another mom who's experienced having a preemie, who's there to answer questions, which is a wonderful program that they offer. And it's not just in Austin. It's in a number of different hospitals.
Okay.
So they do like groups and support groups, things, because frankly, the hospital we were in, the social worker had 60 families at a time.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. So this person helped to do
So it's
more.
just a mom buddy. It's someone. Okay, great.
So they
Kinda
would
what we're
track
doing here.
down information
Yes.
for you.
Very good. Okay.
And funny enough I was like, why do my kid need a speech therapist? They also do feeding therapy at that age.
Okay.
So they explained to us all the various sort of supports that you would seek out for a child with Down syndrome, explaining how that is. And so every state's different how they structure their early childhood intervention program. Texas is means tested, which means is if you're above a specific income bracket, you have to pay basically co-pays to participate in the services. And then there's also a ton of private providers in town.
Okay.
So because of our income and our insurance, we decided to do both. So we have a private provider we've worked with since he came home from the NICU. So we've been with them over 7 years now. And so we started for the therapies with them. And then through early child intervention, we only accessed their case management services. So this was someone, basically a social worker, who was only really focused on making sure that we are connected to the right services at the right time. And this helps specifically for IDEA. So because right before you turn 3, you move then into the school system. So special education actually covers 3 years old to 21. So a lot of us think about like 5-year-olds to 18-year-olds.
Right.
Special education is larger. So it starts earlier and you can go to school until you're 21. That's a choice and a decision.
That's great for parents to know. Yeah, absolutely.
So they help coordinate with your local. So the case management made sure that like I was signed up, and we can talk about this a little bit more, is that they made sure like different resources that might be relevant for a kid with Down syndrome, state resources, that I was on different lists. So there's a Medicaid waiver that for individuals with developmental disabilities, it takes many, many, many years to get actually on the waiver, but you want to get put on it at birth. The other thing is filling out their paperwork for Social Security, because they will qualify for SSI when they turn 18, even though you likely don't qualify once they're under their parents' insurance. But still doing that as a baby, make sure they're already in the system.
Right.
So these people helped with that sort of stuff of just saying, make sure you fill this form, and then they took care of all the coordination with the school district. So the first evaluation we went through with him was when he was about 2.5 years old, and we went through all this adventure during the COVID shutdown. Our oldest was going to kindergarten. Our youngest, we were trying to enroll in early childhood special education. So it was a fun adventure of the schools not knowing.
Look at you being all positive right now.
They got threatened a few times by me because I do know my procedural rights related to IDEA.
Good.
So, like, if nothing else, if someone doesn't respond, I will look up the code, the federal code or the state code, and remind them of what my rights are, which, frankly, when you do that over email, people do respond.
They jump
much
into
quicker.
action.
Yes.
Okay, so let's point that out.
Yes.
So if you're having a problem, it's not necessarily it's bad people. It's just the way the system's set up. It's very helpful if you can go pull up the code, the federal code, or the state code.
Well,
and your interventionist or someone can direct you to that, right? If you're having a hard time, just for families that maybe don't know, well, where do I go get that?
So there are 6 principles to think about related to special education. And this is all in the federal code, but there are things that relate to it also at the state level. So the state will have, it's written into our Texas Administrative Code, or there also will be like procedural like structures around it. The first one is what people call FAPE, which is free and appropriate education.
Yes.
The next one is access to evaluation, which, as I said, we learned the lesson. It's got to be in handwriting, or you got to write it down on a piece of paper, type it up, or put it in the email.
Right. Typing it up and emailing it's okay.
Typing it up email works just fine. It does not have to be a certified letter.
Right. Okay.
But I know that was something I asked someone, was like, how official?
Right.
Email is just fine.
Okay.
The next one is access to individual education plan. So that's the plan that's saying what accommodations the school is going to provide you and how that's structured. The next one is RE, least restrictive environment. So that's saying that they cannot stick your child in a self-contained room, meaning that like they're closed off from the other typical kids unless they can prove that there's a safety reason. So this also relates to things that we think about. That specifically relates to when we think about things with adults, that we're moving a lot away from like day treatment programs. We're understanding that individuals with serious mental illnesses or intellectual disabilities can work in competitive jobs just like everyone else. Maybe it might be part-time, but it's the same sort of principles. The idea that we should always be shooting for the greatest level of inclusion possible.
Okay.
The next one is that you have a right to parent and student input. So the parent has a say in this. It cannot just be teacher and administrator-led. And once the kid's a little bigger, they get an input. So we just went through our first IEP where a 9-year-old was a part of it. So,
oh, wow. Okay.
The school does have processes. They might not bring it up to you, but you can say, I expect my child to be a part of it. And then Round Rock did have a whole process. So they had like paperwork and a training. Like they were prepared and ready and said they knew how to prepare a kid to explain all the processes. And the funniest part with then was our 9-year-old had something happen related to his STAR test, and they didn't follow something that he had signed off on. And then he went to the adults and told them that they had to change his IEP. So he was paying attention in his meeting, and he got his IEP changed for his next STAR test. And the last one, which is what I was referring to that I've sent back to the schools, is procedural safeguards. So this is saying, like, you know, you have due process and how all these things. That's one of the biggest things always to look at.
Okay.
But the ones that I always bring up to schools is by procedural safeguards. Constantly with our child with Down syndrome, I'm always fighting with them on least restrictive environment. And then also, you know, like he has access to education, guys.
Of course. Right. So, like, yes.
But those are the big things that you always want to think about. And those is the language to use.
Very helpful.
It's using those 6 different terms. And the easiest way to Google it is just like, what are the principles for IDEA? And it's 6.
Awesome. Thank you for walking us through that. So another service that we offer here in Texas was it was born of the COVID shutdowns, and you said that your youngest son is a beneficiary of the Supplemental Special Education Services grants, which were thought of by our governor. Governor Abbott realized that children such as yours, that when the school shutdowns or the disruptions occurred, that a lot of our special needs children were really kind of left with their parents to try and figure out what services. And I always say, in his wisdom, he realized we really need to make sure that our most disadvantaged kids, our special needs kids, has access. So he used the GEAR funding to create SSES, which was a $1,500 grant. And that was implemented in January of, I believe, 2021, right? 8 months roughly after shutdowns for special needs kids. And then that was so successful that Senator Larry Taylor and Chairman and Dr. Greg Bonin helped to codify it, so that now I believe it's about 72,000 families like your own have had access to these $1,500 grants, being empowered as parents to say, hey, we need to make sure that our kids get the services that they need. They have the IEP. They are able to, you know, utilize so many amazing different providers, tutoring, therapy, and whatnot. And so, again, over 70,000 families are using it. I believe there's about 30,000 special needs families that are in the wait list. So we're very grateful for the governor and Chairman Bonin and Senator Larry Taylor for pushing that through for the families. But can you tell me about your experience using that and how that's benefited your family?
Yeah, so we used it this past school year for our youngest. Our original plan was, so I had made comments about how he's enrolled in private therapy. So we have... So, generally speaking, I know that they've done a little bit of research on Down syndrome, but it tends to individuals who parenting a child with special needs is more expensive than parenting a typical child. The research that I found about it has said that on average it costs about $100 more a month. it costs us more than that a month. We spend about an extra $70 more a week on his therapy. So currently he does speech therapy and occupational therapy. We have at one point, we were doing 2 days a week of speech, 1 day a week of occupational therapy, and 1 day of PT, and we would kind of layer it. So like that's 4 copays. Currently we're at 2 copays. But this is a reality of I have a flexible job, and, you know, we have decent insurance, you know, a combination, and can afford and have decided to prioritize that.
Right.
So we had decided when we got access to that, we were going to primarily use it for copays. It's a new program. With every new program, there's a lot of implementation hurdles. It took me a bit to figure out that, like, I had to figure out paperwork. Our therapy place had to figure out paperwork. So we used up some of our months before we finally could turn in the paperwork or like get reimbursed. Because how the program works is it's like you have to like change over, instead of you paying out of pocket, that it goes to the state.
It goes.
Every program is interesting bureaucratically from an implementation standpoint. So it took us a little bit. I'm sure 5 years from now, our therapy place, like if a mom comes up and asks,
boom,
like,
this is what it is.
This is what it is.
Because for some families, it's unknown. Right? We want more families to recognize
so
that
they were
you
learning,
can use these services. Right.
So we were only, I think, the second family who had asked them. They're a decent-sized provider in Greater Austin, but it took them a little bit for them to figure out exactly how it works, because they like how things get billed differently.
Okay.
So, you know, probably by this year, the next family who comes in, it will be more seamless.
Right.
And so then what we ended up doing with the rest of the funds was our youngest, while he qualified for a lot of things when he was under 5, he doesn't really qualify for anything now except for special education during the school year. So how special education works, when there's this thing called extended school, but you have to regress, which means is you're not meeting your your IEP plan, the things that they said they want you to achieve that year. And he's really good at those inch stones, which is what people call them in the disability world. Instead of milestones, inch stones, because they like very slowly go, you know, like click, get towards that milestone. And he's really good at making progress. It's just not as big a progress as his other friends who are 6 years old. So what we ended up deciding to do this summer was we're doing a mix of, he's going to daycare, but then also there was an old daycare teacher who's now a paraprofessional in one of the older schools. So we're paying her to do some tutoring. And so we bought some other school like items, so we have things that could be in the classroom
with this
money.
Right.
So that's what we spent the rest of our money on. Was we set up an area at our house with like ABC's numbers, like items that he would find in the classroom. So she would have resources to set up like a little classroom sort of area to do work with him during the summer. So that was how we used our money. But
that's
like
awesome.
I'd say every family's different, and also that, like, you know, because I said, you know, we spend at least once or twice a week at the pediatric therapy place in town. You interact with families from a wide array of needs. So you have some children who are physically disabled, who are wheelchair bound, to, you know, a kiddo that's having very short-term speech need, where maybe they only hang out there for 6 months and they never come back, or they have kids like our youngest who's running around with all the other kiddos, and they're just, you know, it's just taking them longer to meet those milestones. So, you know, I've met a lot of different moms in the waiting rooms, and everyone's on a different, you know, adventure, and also what their child's life will look like as an adult.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing about your personal experience. I would love to take a turn and talk to you a little bit. You mentioned it at the beginning, talking about particularly when it comes to children and with 504s, but just the anxiety and different aspects of mental health that can play into what's going on. And I think it's no secret that we are really witnessing a mental health crisis in this generation. And as a mom, really, and as a professional, what are you seeing that you think is contributing a lot to that mental health crisis? And what can you share with other moms about moms and dads about, how they can be empowered to really help their children as they're navigating young, adolescents, but also we've got, kids that as they're going through puberty, they're being exposed to a lot of things that's a terrible time in life to begin with. And so what can you offer to the parents of Texas?
Yeah.
How can you empower them with other things that you're seeing in your field and also as a parent?
Yeah. So what we've been seeing, we've seen a pretty steady uptick in psychological needs, specifically depression, anxiety. We're not so much seeing an increase in like bipolar or schizophrenia, but it's specifically depression, anxiety that we're seeing an increase. And if you look at the charts, you'll see that they started about 2012. So when people talk about this all COVID related, COVID was an accelerator,
Sure,
but it wasn't the start of it. So there is conflict out in the field. Any of us who are academics, we like to fight with each other. That's just how it is. It's part of your training.
Sure.
But there is a lot more coalescing right now around the idea that the difference between a play-based childhood and a phone-based childhood is what we think is the cause. And
Technology.
Technology.
Yeah.
And it has multiple different parts. So it's not just social media. So the idea is that from a parenting perspective, one of the things is about that parenting looks, and people make this comment all the time. What we experience in like the 80s and 90s during the summer looks very different than what you get now with children. There's a lot more structure and format. Kids are enrolled in a lot more activities. They have a lot less downtime, and they have a lot more supervision. From a mental health perspective, like if anyone wants to think back to when they took like developmental psychology or anything, this all comes from Erickson. It's not new. People discovered this, talked about this like in the 50s. But the idea of like how your adolescent brain develops, the thing is some of the dumb things that adolescents do, the risky behavior, actually teaches them things.
Yes.
So if we take away all the risk, they really struggle to start making decisions. And so then that has, they start struggling as young adults. So they will, because they haven't taken some of those kind of risky, but like with a trampoline underneath.
Right.
You want them to make some decisions and be able to fail.
Right.
But fail with mom and dad still around, or grandma and grandpa, whoever it is. These are the things we've been saying forever around foster care, is that our foster care system doesn't help to teach them how to take safe risk, or like when it's a risk and when it's,
risk
like
assessment, which
risk
is what
assessment. Exactly.
Your brain.
So that's part of it. That's actually the reason why the play-based childhood is helpful. Like kids playing in the neighborhood and dealing with social conflict actually teaches them a ton of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's part of it. So it's the they're not being challenged to have some of that neighborhood social conflict.
Because a lot of let's be real honest, a lot of children are watching, they're handed iPads at a very young age, or television or computers or whatever, and they're spending a lot of time. I mean, in fact, I think I was made aware that there are whole channels where kids watch other kids open toys.
Yes, that does
play
exist.
With them.
Yes.
Like, what?
And it's not just...
And the kids love it. They like to watch other.
It's not just the device use. Some of it's even if they're out and about. But if you think about, they're not like playing neighborhood like pickup football or soccer
or tag.
They're going to an organized activity with an adult supervising. It's more about the mixed age play is actually really, really helpful to their developmental stuff. So it's they're either in an activity supervised by adults or they're on a device. And so that's so they're not learning all the social skills. The other part is that a lot of individuals now are getting a smartphone by the time that they go to middle school. And if any of us thinks about middle school, it was probably not the best time in your life.
No.
Especially for women. It was not enjoyable.
Not enjoyable.
So now you're not just getting picked on at school and the girls specifically, this does happen with boys, but it's specifically problematic for middle school girls. It's not just that they're having conflict and changing who they're friends with and not friends with in the classroom. It's that it's coming to home. People are commenting things on social media. They just can't escape it. And then if they are on social media, all they are scrolling through is seeing these airbrush ideal versions. So just everything they're encountering is making them is killing their self-esteem, making them anxious, and they just are questioning
who they
are.
Are they developing on time? I mean, I can remember watching Dawson's Creek and a couple of other shows and of adults playing teenagers. Right? They hired adults to play teenagers and thinking, oh, I don't look like that.
Yes.
I don't look like that. And why do I not look like that? But if you're right, that was only, a couple nights a week or whatever. It wasn't a constant of seeing, woman after woman after woman and going, I don't measure up. I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
I don't look like that.
Boys is a little different. They're not as interested in social media. Okay. Some of it with them is more about if in your own household, kick them out of your house and make them go play video games together in the basement like they did, when we were kids, versus now the thing is they're staying in their house and they're actually playing more with their friends, but they're doing it virtually.
Okay.
But the other thing is around phones and this is why I'm a big proponent of phone-free schools, and also saying wait until they're in high school for the smartphones and the social media, because you just don't need it near middle schoolers. They just can't developmentally handle it.
Right. Well, when they're in that developmental stage, talking about when you're seeing it. So something that I've been made aware of, and I'm here for it. You can speak as a mom and a professional, but as a mom, I've been made aware that there are several schools and PTA programs and things like that where the parents are getting together and kind of loosely making an agreement. Some of them are signing contracts together saying, we all agree we're not going to buy our child a smartphone until they're, 16 years old, until they can drive, until whatever it is that the group of parents, and it's really providing that support because it's hard when kids see.
You don't want to be the only one.
You don't want to be the only one. And so with the research that's come out that I'm sure you're aware of parents kind of uniting, feeling empowered to make decisions for their children, locking arms and saying, we realize this is not healthy for our kids. We agree we are not going to do this. It's going to be the flip phone. It's going to be the, call and texting only, or whatever it is, which is really making a comeback for not just adolescents, from what I understand, but also adults who are realizing that our brains have kind of been rewired. I know there's been times when I'm sitting there doing some work and I'm looking at a cell phone. I'm trying to keep up with multiple devices, which is probably not the best for grown-up brains, but certainly not for little brains. So I think that's what, as a great way for parents to really work together and say, look, the science is there. The data shows us this is not good for our kids. So let's make a course correction and let's empower our teachers to do the same. I hear this all the time from teachers that they're saying that kids are scrolling on their phones nonstop. Yeah. And it's distracting from a teaching side of things. It's distracting to the class. And I know for a fact, again, I hear this all the time. This is how a lot of this inappropriate material makes its way into our classrooms as well.
Yeah. And so and what you're talking about is what's been pretty popular right now, is saying it is a mix of policy and parents working together. So the idea that having school districts, or at the state level, there's already been some states who've done phone-free school policies. I know it's being discussed in Texas. But the idea is, putting some things in place to say, as a district, we're going to come up with these policies, and helping to support the teachers, because you also don't want to be the one teacher that's saying, not in my classroom, in the next classroom.
That's exactly right. Same thing. You just like you don't want to be the only parent that says, no, you're not getting that. By the way, I will say that I have my oldest is 7 years old, and we don't do technology at our house, but they of course see it out. Yeah. And it's, probably for the past year, she said, when do I get a phone? And I'm like, when you can drive and pay for it. I go to work. But I think that it's important for parents to all say, if you have younger kids, you can start introducing this idea that this is not a foregone conclusion at a young age. And that's just kind of from my perspective, is a really helpful way, and you can back the schools up, and they feel like that this is adults working together as opposed to being pitted against each other. Well, Miss So-and-so lets it in her class, or so-and-so's mom lets them have it. I really do think it's the ability for all parents, all teachers to work together and truly be empowered.
Yes, exactly. And what we've been doing is, so what's popular in our neighborhood is there's these GPS watches. So our 9-year-old has one of those now, which is also related to teaching independent skills. So when I've talked a lot to other parents about this, because, you know, some of my mom friends know what I do professionally, and they hear all this stuff in the news, and they're like, what's the suggestions? And all of it's more about taking little nuggets for independence. So we have a really great neighborhood recreational swim team. So one of the big things that we were doing this year, so with our 9-year-old and some of the other kids above him, and some of them were already doing this, but the idea that, like, we're not going to drive you down the street. You guys are scooting, riding your bike, walking, whatever. But so people have the little GPS watches. And it's not so much about us, like, tracking them. It's more that no one has home phones anymore. So, like, I can't leave him at, if I'm there or husband's there with our little guy, like, he has no way to communicate if he's home. And then, so we were doing some of that sort of stuff, and that was discussions with other parents. So, you know, he has one of the GPS watches now, and so it was great of that could be at swim team with his little brother and be like, hey, it's time to move on over, and then he'd come on his own. So him and other kids were doing that, which is helpful if other kids in the neighborhood were doing it.
Right.
And so we've been talking to him about telling him, you know, like, and talking to some of the other neighborhood parents of saying, hey, like, let's tell them that they're only getting flip phones. Like, you're going to get a smartphone for high school, but you guys are getting flip phones. And they also just recently found out that the middle school that we matriculate into is enforcing a new policy, and they announced it to all the kids already.
Oh,
so
wonderful.
I don't know what it will look like, but Round Rock is now, or at least in our, they call them verticals. So the high school that we go into, at least our part,
yours is
implementing phone-free policies for,
but
like,
moms
middle school
and
high school.
dads should be asking for this. They should be asking their administrators.
And supposedly the parents were excited at the meeting. We don't have a kid going in, but I heard from some of the other parents who were at the 6th grade meeting, and the kids groaned and the parents were excited.
Right, because then you can blame it on the school and say, it's the school that made this choice, right?
Yeah,
well, that's awesome. Debbie, I'm so happy that you have shared all your experience as a special needs mother and navigating that. I know that you have given our watchers so many good tips on how they can ensure that their children have access to that. And then, of course, as a professional, as we're coming close to our time to wrap up, I would love for you to share with Texas parents just a tip or something that they can do to truly feel empowered, whether it's within the special needs community or with technology or both. You just have such a wealth of knowledge and an expertise that most parents do not have. What would you like to say to the parents of Texas? You can tell them right there.
Well, my biggest thing is that what I always say, specifically with our youngest, because our experience is more special ed and not special needs for our oldest. With our youngest, I always say that it's not having him that is the struggle, it's dealing with all society that is the struggle. So I just more or less specifically encourage parents who don't have children who interact with the special ed system or have a disability to work with their children around making sure that they are being inclusive to other children with different needs, because that's the biggest thing that we've seen has made a difference is that the children at our daycare and their school are always seeking out our 6-year-old and making sure he's included, and that makes a wild difference of his experience.
That's wonderful. Debbie, thank you for being here and sharing your experience as a mom and as a professional. Thank you all for joining us. This is Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin, and now you have the power.